I'm really sorry. Like it took 5 or 10 minutes. Like it happened 5 or 10 minutes late. So I got a lot of permissions, but yeah, we were just setting up, so couldn't accept everyone at that point of time. Yeah, so I guess everyone over here is like, I think everyone is from software background over here. So, yeah, I'm assuming that everyone is from software over here. Yep. So basically, the agenda over today is ki, like I have always like I've heard with a lot of people. I mean, a lot of the students as well as people in our in our group, they always tend to ask me ki what is code review, because I often tell them ki write quality code, it will not be reviewed, it will not be merged. So they often ask me ki what is this code review and how does it happen in different companies. So I thought today I'll bring someone like who is way more experienced, like and working in a very good company, to share his knowledge and any questions you feel you want to ask. So you can ask in our Q&A session. So today we have Anshu Rai with us. Like he's working in Postman as a software developer. And yeah, Anshu, hi. It would be good if you could quickly give your introduction.
Okay, hi everyone. As Kritika just mentioned, my name is Anshu Rai, and currently I'm working at Postman as a software engineer. So it's been around 1.5 year working at Postman. Before that, I worked for one and half year in Paymentus, which is a fintech company. So just like PhonePe. So yeah, I have around 3 year of experience working in fintech space. So yeah, that's about me.
Okay, so how did you like land up in software development? Like you were always a keen child. I mean, ready to develop things, playing around these things, or it just happened eventually?
No, I think I basically in my class, I think in 10th, I decided to basically pursue engineering, and I think I remember the first laptop that I got from my parents was around 7 or 8. So I got a hang of computers pretty early in my life, and computers were a kind of intriguing thing for me. I used to do a lot of stuff with that. So basically, with time, I decided that okay, I was introduced with the coding. I think first time in my +1, that is 11th. So I think that at that time I decided that okay, this is the thing that I like, and I want to basically move forward in this domain. So in my +1, I decided to be a computer science engineer, and I think it was like decided at that time only, and I think I did my computer science after that, and then started my journey with Paymentus. Worked there in a fintech space for 1.5 year. Obviously, it was pretty. Working in a fintech company was a great experience. Of course, any fintech company that you work with, they have a pretty high benchmark of a code quality. They have a pretty good like enterprise. They are obviously Paymentus was enterprise company. I think Google, Amazon, all of these guys were using their network to make the payments. After that, basically, I got into the Postman. In Postman, also I work with in basically billing and subscription team. So again, same in the fintech space. So yeah, I think that the journey has been like this.
Yeah, like it's been a fantastic journey. I can relate from you.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's good. Like you have been around fintech for a long period of time, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's great. So I just wanted to ask you, like most of us ask me, what is this code review process and why do we need it? So can you quickly walk us through it? Like what is it and what is the importance of it?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
do we really?
Yeah, so basically code review is basically a process where whatever code that you write in any organization, or let's say that you're writing some code, and it's a process where that code gets reviewed by your colleague, mostly the colleague or that person can be senior or can be of same level. Mostly it's a senior level. So basically the review process happens so that the colleague can verify that whatever code that you have written, that code is basically a quality code, and it is basically, it is not creating any issue in the code base, right? So it's just a
Right.
process where your code, whatever you have written, gets reviewed by your senior colleague, and so that the code quality basically remains the same and it do not get compromised. So that's basically what the code review process is.
Right, correct. So from the first day itself, like how can we manage to write good code? I mean, a lot of questions around it. Ki how do we know what is good code, what is bad code? Because like once I write something, I will feel that it is the best code. So how will I decide if it is good or bad? Like how?
Yeah, that's a good question actually. So again, good or bad is obviously that comes down to
Perspective.
basically you cannot quantify what is good, what is bad. It obviously it's comparison, right? So for let's talk about that, for a company, if you are working in a Google, the code that you write might be bad, but the same code, if it is for a startup, it is good, right? So there is
Right.
nothing like good or bad code, but yeah, there are certain things that you can of course note it down, and there are certain areas which is of course you can identify a bad code easily, right? Generally every company that you work with has a quality benchmark, right? And
Right.
if you are working for an enterprise company, obviously their quality benchmark is very high. So they have a standard, and basically whatever code that you write, it should be above that standard, right? So let's say that if you get into Google have some quality benchmark, or let's say either you are in a Postman of course has a quality benchmark. So whatever code that you write, it should be basically match that quality benchmark. If you are not writing that code, then your PR will not accept it, and it will be rejected. Now the question is that how do you identify that your code is a good or bad? So I think when you get started, obviously there is no way you can identify it, right? When
Right.
I remember that when I started my journey as a software engineer, I think when I was not into industry, I didn't had any idea what a good code or what a bad code is, right? So it's
Right.
just you will only get realize when basically you get into the industry, or you see some good code, or you when your code gets reviewed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, when your code gets reviewed, then it will you get to know that okay, what are the pointers on which my code was reviewed, or and basically when it gets reviewed, what is the process that people follows it, and based on
Right.
those processes you will get to know that okay, the code that you are writing, is it a good code or a bad code. So again, the definition or the good or the bad, that depends on the company and the kind of quality that company maintains, the benchmark that maintains. Based on that, you can classify your code good or bad. But I think in a normal thing, when you are writing some code, let's say that you are a developer, you are writing an add function, right, in JavaScript,
Right.
and those add function is basically taking two numbers and it is returning it, right?
Right.
As simple as that. Basically, there are a couple of things that you as a developer can basically notice and can do in order to increase the code quality. The first thing is that let's say that there are two variables, and those two variables you are simply adding it and you are returning the result of that. Now what happens if basically someone call that function, but that person only passed a single variable? In that case,
Right.
your function will return a nan, right? so
Correct.
so you are writing it, so you have to think about this, okay, from the user perspective or from the edge cases, that what happens if one of the someone calls it with one variable. So you need to basically take the second variable as a default parameter, or you need to
Correct.
make it write it in a way that it can handle one variable, two variables, and three variables, right? So in every case your function should return a number, so you can basically handle that. You can write basically documentation around the function, that okay, these are the number of parameters, this function receives the type of the parameter should be like this, right? So these are the couple of
Right.
things that you can do when you're writing your code, that would basically increase your code quality at the beginner level.
Correct. So the next, like, yeah, you're talking about like code quality only just to get it merged in our code base, like whatever company we are working with. But how does it help as a developer to me on a personal level?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. So basically, code review is a process which helps a lot in the development of a basically in the growth of a developer, right? So I think
Right.
I
Yeah.
personally what I think it has helped me a lot in my growth. So basically the way it happens is that, like, let's basically coming back to the first point, that at the beginner level, or when you are not working in a company, you write the code, you don't have any idea whether your code is good or bad, right?
Correct.
Because you
Right.
do not have any reference point until unless you access some companies access code, or you see a open source code base, you can basically get to know about the quality, right? But there is no one who is telling you that your code is bad or good, because you do not have any reference point, right?
Right.
So in your company, when you get into an organization, and then you write your first implement your first feature, and then when you raise a PR, right? So the senior folks that is reviewing the PR, that person will basically go through your code, right? And then they will evaluate your code, and they will point out the mistakes that you have made, right? So it
Hmm.
can be the implementation mistake also, it can be the edge cases that you might have missed, it can be
Miss.
that you have followed improper variable names, your functions do not have any document JS doc, right? Your functions basically returns some incorrect values in some edge cases. So these are the pointers that basically they will look to they basically generally look. So it depends, it varies from person to person and level to level. A staff engineer will evaluate your code very differently than a senior
Correct.
software engineer, than a software engineer. But I'm talking about a very generic kind of review process. Now generally in the code review process, the implementation is not something that gets reviewed. The implementation review happens one level before the code review, right? So when you, before writing a code, basically first you write your implementation of a particular feature in a doc. You create an implementation doc, and then the
Okay.
implementation docs gets reviewed by the senior colleague, and then you start writing the code. But like in most of the companies, if you are in a startup company, they don't follow this approach. So
Correct.
sometimes basically people also review your implementation in the PR. So what happens is that, suppose you have implemented a feature, right, and your approach was there was some approach, and then a senior software engineer reviews your code, and then the person says that, okay, there is some gap in your thinking. Your code that you have written, that code will fail in this kind of scenarios, right? Your code have not basically has not handled this kind of these edge cases, right? Your code
Right.
lacks proper documentation or proper variable name. So you can clearly see the difference, right? The difference in the level and difference in your thinking and your approach. and
Correct.
and basically what you have to do is that moving forward, you have to reduce these differences, and that's where the growth happens, because you have your own approach, and you know that you went ahead with a particular approach, you write your code in a certain way, and the next person is saying that, no man, you have to, there are certain these are the things which you are doing wrong. So you can see the differences clearly, and then what you have to do is that you try to reduce those differences, and with a period of time you realize that you have basically closed that gap, close the difference, and now basically you have improved as a developer, right? So that is where basically code reviews help a lot in the in the growth of developer. I personally believe that code review is the fastest way to grow as a developer, right?
Right.
Because here
Totally
the
agree.
cycle is very fast.
Correct. So talking to you feels like Postman has a very high benchmark for code quality. So how does it feel like? How is the code review process in Postman? Like what is the benchmark over there? Of course, talking to you, it's like I know it's high, but yeah, still, if you could walk us through.
Yeah. So of course, Postman is an enterprise company, so they have a pretty high standard of code, right? And
Right.
obviously, the domain in which I am working in, basically that's a fintech domain, right? So you can't afford any bugs, any issues there, because it directly impact money, right? So if you create any bugs, you are directly losing out money, right? So
Right.
the cost of bug is very high in basically, especially in my domain. So that's why we can't afford any bugs, we can't afford any glitches in the production. So what we have to make sure is that whatever code that we are shipping it out in production, it has to be of very high quality, right? And so we have a very tedious, very rigorous code review process, and basically we do multiple round of code reviews, and generally it's basically people involved at different level in the code review process. So generally, let's say that there is a senior software engineer who is reviewing your code, then there is a staff engineer who is reviewing your code. So like there is no code which gets into the production without a tedious, rigorous code review process. And mostly when we do write our code and implement any feature, we also give very high value towards the basically test coverage. So whatever code that you have written out, it should obviously be a good quality code. It should not have any bugs, of course. And how do you make sure that the code that you are writing is behaving exactly the way it should behave? So for that, you have to write a lot of unit test cases. You have to write a lot of integration tests. So basically, the test make sure that you are not shipping any production issues, any bugs in the production, because we can't afford it. So the combination of a very rigorous code review process, as well as that involves having a unit test cases and integration test cases, it basically makes the overall process pretty good, and which basically allow us to reduce, ship issues, ship features without any production issues.
Okay, so yeah, so did you ever bypass this test cases and produce any bug in the production? I don't think you should.
Yeah,
you
so
would have, but still.
yeah, so generally there are some scenarios. Obviously, as you are as a developer, right? And let's say that when there is a large feature getting shipped out, right? Obviously, there is a lot of test cases. There is a tedious, rigorous test process of code review. But we are developer. We are prone to make mistakes, right? And mistake happens, right? You can make this process you can better this process, but this whole process is not 100% like that. Okay, so there are scenarios where, of course, there are some issues that there are bugs that gets introduced in the get shipped to the production, and there has been instances where we have basically identified some bugs in the production, right? But mostly it's not of a very high level, right? So there is different categories of the production issues or the bugs that is there. But being in a fintech domain, any bug is basically for us is kind of a very high critical, because we basically it can create very high impact in the revenue. So basically, I remember in one scenario basically where we skipped the code review process, and it was it was kind of a hotfix release. So generally, what happens is that there is a one single release that went ahead, and then there was we realized in our internal testing environment that okay, there are some issues that is there. So basically, we do a hotfix, and generally what happens is that hotfix are basically is something that basically can have a, sometimes people don't review the hotfix very rigorously. Why? Because it need to be shipped very fast to the production or pre-production environment, right? So I remember one such instance where we were trying to fix a particular problem in internal testing environment, that is pre-production, and then we push a hotfix, and that hotfix was not tested rigorously, and we rolled out the feature, and then it crept in a bug in the production. So yeah, that was pretty critical issue, which allowed basically the whole basically the payment page to basically get broken, and user was not able to basically make any payment for. And the good thing was that, of course, in our system we have basically the error logging, so we were notified about the error for the first, like when the first error occurred in production, we were notified, and we basically pushed the fix for it quite fast. So yeah, I've been a victim of that, and there are instances where we have not followed the proper code review process, and because of that bug was shipped in production.
Okay, right. Great story. Yeah. So I guess Kotesh, like I saw you raised your hand. So yeah, do you have any questions? Feel free to ask.
Yes. I'm audible.
Yeah, Kotesh, you're audible.
Great. And first of all, I would like to thank you folks for bringing up this thing, like the code review, which is like amazing. But like most of the folks won't care about this much, like especially for the beginners, right? So I would like to like thank you. And yeah, coming to the question, so if in case like being a new developer in a team where there is a strict review system followed, so how should we take like if we raise a PR and if we send it to a review, then obviously there will be like multiple comments where updating and suggestions, all of this thing will commented, right? So what should be that person's way of taking those things? Like obviously it will be like uh, extensive, right? Like it will be like immense, like overwhelming, right? So
Right.
what should be the person's attitude to like take them on, like accept them? Look, I just want to ask that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Anshu.
Yeah, that's actually a good question. It has happened with, I think, with everyone. It has happened with me also. So especially when you start your journey in the software industry. So basically, I remember that in my initial few features that PR that I have raised, I think it was like a pretty tedious process for me, and it was around somewhere close to 50-60 comments that was popping up in my PRs, right? So when you get started, you already have some doubts in your mind that okay, you are trying very hard to understand the code base, trying to contribute so that you can get the validation that no man, you are right, you belongs here, right? And then you raise the PR and these things start coming up, right? So which is pretty much normal thing. It has happened with, I think every developer has to go through the journey. Now the question is how do you handle it, right? So basically when you're raising your PR and you're getting those comments, first of all you need to accept that this is perfectly fine, right? It is perfectly fine that you are getting around 50-60 comments in the initial PRs, and that is fine. You don't have to worry about it, but so you don't have to take it like okay, you have some issues with your code, right? So you don't have to take it in a negative way. You can take it in a positive way, right? So the more comment that is coming up in your PR, it means that there are some right, you need to basically you need to write your code in a better way, or I mean you're not thinking about some scenarios which is missing up, and because of that the comment is getting popped up, right? So you have to improve in that. So the difference is there, and you need to improve it up, right? Now I personally, whenever I review any code and when I give these many comments, or when I do some rigorous, of course every PR is a rigorous code review process, I generally say to every developer, especially the new joiners, is that uh, the process can be overwhelming for you, right? And it can be rigorous and tedious for you. You might feel frustrated, but trust me on that, the level at which you are feeling the frustration or the overwhelming, right? It is no comparison that if I basically ship your code without any issues, without doing proper code review, I ship your code to the production and there your code break the production, right? So now that
Now the
stress,
level is too much.
yeah, that stress, I can say that stress is basically 50 times more than what is the code review process, the stress that you are getting, or the frustration that you have in the code review process, right? So it's always better, I always say this to everyone that I talk to, is that is fine. You're sometimes spending an extra hour getting stressed out, getting frustrated. That is perfectly fine in the code review process. That is happening because it will allow you to grow as a developer. Because if that doesn't happen and your code basically gets into the production and then it create problem, then that is basically then there are more
Next level.
eyeballs, there are more eyeballs on you, there is a lot more focus, there is a lot of stress, and then you are obviously creating issues for your company also, right? So I think if you compare these two scenarios, I think the first one is still fine, right? So you don't basically take it in negative way, take it in a positive way, improve. What you should focus on is that you should not make the same mistake twice. So let's say that there is some comments, what you should basically focus on is that you should not get the same comment again and again in your PR, right? When you join any company, right, the company knows that you need to basically get onboarded, and it will take some time for you to fully onboarded into their code system or their review process or their quality benchmark. So initially you can basically ask, you can be stupid, right? You can ask stupid question, you can make tons of mistake, but get basically make that mistake, get rid with it in the initial 3 or 4 months, so that you don't make the same mistake in the future, like after 1.5 years, right? Because then if you make those mistake, right, then it's bad for you, I think. But in the starting you have that flexibility of making those mistakes, having those rigorous test PR reviews, having lot of comments. But your goal should be that with time you should reduce the number of comments, you should not make same mistakes. And it might, I know that it can be a little frustrating at times, but that's fine. You have to go through the journey, there is no escape hatch for that.
Okay,
Right.
so basically, like in order to avoid that that higher damage after that whatever the code I have written that getting shifted to production.
Yeah.
So I have to sort it out during the reviews, right?
Correct. Review process, because in the review process there is only, right, review process is not like is basically a process where people are there to judge you. Trust me on that. It's more of like that. If you're writing some code in a right, and there are some you might have missed some edge cases, and there are a person who is doing the same thing for let's say for 1.5 year and 2 years, right? Let's say that I have a 3 year of experience, you have a 1 year of experience. Obviously I those 2 years means a lot, and I know there are some scenario things I know better than you, right? So it's basically coming, I am thinking from my experience, and then I am telling you that, hey man, you're writing good code, that's fine, right? But I am bringing my expertise into your code, right? So, and that's why there is a comment. So when you are getting more comments, it's not that you have problem, right? It's that the person who is bringing his experience or her experience, right, and they are basically helping you to basically think from their perspective with their experience, and they are helping you to actually grow by those review process, right? So you have to take it with that context, and it will basically help you a lot.
Awesome. I completely agree with that. And now I just thinking the more comments I get, the more scope for me to learn things.
Yeah, exactly,
Right.
exactly. And the faster you
Great.
can overcome out of those mistakes, right? Let's say that in companies, you're in a startup, there is no review process happening, right? Now there is no comments, there is no tedious review process. But so right, and then you have a 3 year of experience, you go into a good company and you start making those basic mistakes. I think that is bad for you. So as long as you, I always say that make mistake, get done with that, right? And just learn from it. Just the only thing is that don't make the same mistake again.
Perfect. Great. Yeah, that answers my question. And thanks for your insights. Thanks, Anshu.
No problem.
Yeah, thank you, Ganesh, for this amazing question. So, the answer is कि we should not repeat ourselves. We should not repeat the same mistakes. And if in your company, for example, if you're working in an early stage startup, as Anshu said, कि the code review process is not very, not very tough. Tough in the sense like they don't see that much because for X number of reasons, for resources and for whatever reason they might be having. I worked in a startup and my first company, I guess, yeah. So in my first company, on the first day, it was an early stage startup. So I just made some mistake over there, and it got merged in the dev environment, and it blocked all the notification, and it was my first day. So yeah, from that was the incident I realized the code review process is very good, because at the end of the day when every notification was blocked, the question came to me, why did you write that code, that kind of code? But since we don't have any solid review system in a startup,
Correct.
so yeah, that was heartbreaking for the first.
I think if those scenarios get into, those bugs get into the production, it's not your mistake. It's the failure of the whole team, right?
Right.
So the first thing is that the person who reviewed the code, why it was not caught up in the review process, why it was not caught in the testing process, right? So I generally say that whenever someone make any mistake at the beginner level, I say that if your bug is gets shipped to the production level, that's not your mistake actually. It should have been caught, right? Because it was basically a failure at the review level, at the testing level. I think so. Yeah, so basically, yeah, that's the advantage of having a code review process, so that we basically can get rid of these scenarios.
Right. So as you all know, in startups we don't have those rigorous code reviews. So what should we do? In those scenarios.
I think basically, so I just basically again, when I talk about code review process, right, or a code review in general, or a code quality in general, a lot of people basically say that, okay, this is a process where generally when you are experienced developer, or let's say when you are a already working professional, it is for them only, right? But trust me on that, it is for the beginner level also. When you are preparing for your interviews at the right, let's say that you are writing some you are solving some DSA question, and you implemented a function, and in that function basically you have followed some really bad practices, right? Duplicate variable name, improper variable name, the functions are not written well, there is no documentation around the functions, there is no variable parameters handling, right? And then you basically you write it, the test case was passed, and that you say that okay, I don't have to worry about the code quality in general. But if you write the same code in the interview, let's say that you are interview for an Amazon or for a postman, and I ask you to basically solve a simple sorting question, I will basically give a very high emphasis on how you're writing the code, right? So like every these big companies, they give a very basically very emphasis on the code quality. And so even though if your test cases are passing, if you're writing some bad code, you will be actually rejected in the interview. I have actually seen people getting rejected in the interviews, this round interviews, because of the code quality. They say that okay man, I was able to basically solve the problem, all test cases was passing, but because of the code quality they were not basically moved to the next round. Even that has happened in the OA round, right? So so there also let's say that I basically rolled out a process, and basically there was 100 people who have got full marks, but I need to only filter out 10 people. So on what benchmark I'm going to filter it, right? So obviously I will see the code quality. So it's basically code quality as a process or basically thing exists at every level. Right? So at the beginner level, when you're working in a startup, if there is no code review happening at your company, then I would say that of course that's a really bad thing, because you will never realize that where you are lacking, and the basically you will not get that opportunity of a growth, right? And trust me on that, moving forward 1 or 2 years, if you're working in the same environment without having a proper code review, then you will not grow as a developer, right? Because the developers are tend to basically not do anything until unless there is someone who is pointing out that okay, these are the things you need to do. I mean, that's a normal tendency. Obviously exceptions are always there. So I think at the startup level, I have seen a lot of people struggling with that, and the question is how do you basically improve that. So I think the first thing that you need to know about is that what is code review process, and then you need to basically find a solution for that.
Yeah, Anshu, and what is this OA round? Like, if you can.
OA is basically the online assessment round that happens in when you basically apply for any
Okay.
job.
Right. Okay. So how do we, like, we don't have any platform as of now. I mean, for anywhere to get code reviewed and everything. So yeah. So how, like, I know there are few things available, but yeah, could you tell us about something which you're building, like something around this?
Yeah, I mean, again, I mean, so if you're not, it basically to get you to basically improve as a developer, or basically you need to get or write a quality code. You need to get your code quality checked by someone who knows about, who has a taste of a quality code, right? So
Right.
if that's the thing, right? Now the thing is that I would personally say that open source is a great platform, right? Because I would personally say that if you're working in a startup, right, you can basically go and start contributing to open source, because open source is one platform where the code reviews happen pretty rigorous, and you can learn about the code quality. You can get the taste of a code quality with the open source contribution, right? But again, the question is that in order to contribute to the open source, first you need to know about the open source community, and you should have some quality benchmark, right? So I think for
Right.
that there is a gap. So a lot of people is not basically, what happens to the people who do not have any awareness about the open source contribution, and they don't want to go that route, right? So one option is obviously open source, and they are obviously, if you are contributing to a project which is active, and they are, when you raise a PR, it is getting reviewed properly, right? So if it is getting reviewed properly, then of course you will learn, right? Because ultimately you are getting a feedback from the senior folks out there. But if it is if you don't want to go to that route, then I think it's totally come down to the same scenario. Either your friends, you need to take help of your friend, or you need a platform where basically you can interact with senior folks and you can get your code reviewed by that senior folks, so that you can get the taste of a quality code.
Right. Right. So, like, can you tell me, like, if you ever had any incident while reviewing any code? I mean, any challenging code review you did,
Yeah, I mean, so
and how?
basically the last feature that we rolled out at my organization, obviously, that was pretty challenging one. So generally, the challenging code reviews are the reviews where first of all you are shipping a major feature that is pretty critical, and then there are basically multiple PRs related to that, right? So the thing
Right.
is that if you're reviewing the multiple PRs, you need to bring up the context between the one PR to another one because both of them are interlinked. So the challenge is that when you are doing the code review, right, and the more seniority you have in your organization, the more responsible you are. So first, the challenge is that it was challenging because I was reviewing the whole feature in one go, and the whole feature was actually broken down into two PRs, which I think is obviously can be broken down into multiple small PRs because the smaller the PR is, the more effective it is to review it, right? But again, when you are shipping some major feature, it might be possible that the developer has not raised multiple PRs, right? So I
Right.
generally say to everyone that you basically raise PR for a feature level. One single feature you added, raise a PR for that, right? One single feature you add, raise a PR for that, so that I can basically review it very effectively. But if you are basically combining everything in a single PR, then of course it will be challenge for me to review, and I will not be able to review it properly also. So so again, that was pretty challenging because I was just reviewing the whole feature. It was a pretty big feature. We were shipping it out, and that involved in the that has basically only two PRs, and there was a lot of changes in that. So of course, that was another thing, and basically considering the criticality of the feature, there can be basically like hundred of things that can go wrong. Basically, had to be very focused, but yeah, ultimately we shipped it out, and even though like we basically caught a couple of issues in the internal testing environment, but yeah, that was pretty challenging, and yeah, so that's basically my experience, the last one that I had. So generally, I just say that
Okay.
the process, the PR, the review process, if it is getting challenging for you, then there is something wrong with the process itself, right? Generally, it should not
Right.
be challenging. So it was challenging because I was reviewing a big feature that comprised of only two PRs, and also we were pretty close to the release timeline. So I had to review it within a 1 day of or 2 day of time constraint. So if you introduce time constraint and if you introduce more number of changes in a single PR, it becomes challenging. So basically, generally, it should not be challenging. Of course, no, when I say challenging, it means that it should not. It can be challenging in technical terms, but generally, it should not be challenging because of this constraint that I just mentioned in my experience.
Right. Right. So we have Ria, like she wants to ask something. Yeah, yeah, Ria, please go.
Yeah, hi, Pritika, hi, Anshu.
Hi.
Thanks for making a difference. Yeah, so I just wanted Anshu, like, if he could give some insights upon what kind of real life examples or mistakes that we do while raising PRs, as in just some examples of what mistakes in code you did, so a few examples that you could highlight upon or insights upon.
Yeah, so that's a good question actually. So the first mistake that every beginner level do, or basically I in the starting I used to do was that I mentioned that whenever I used to build a feature, right? Let's say that I'm building a checkout purchase flow, right? So user can basically go to the checkout page. They can basically select the whatever product that they want to buy, and then they can make the payment. There would be a lot of payment methods, and then they can make the payment through that. If I'm building this whole feature end to end, right? What I would do is that what I did actually was that I basically raise a single PR for that, and let's say that that PR has around 64 file changes. It has
Oh
around
God.
around 2.5k of diffs, if I'm not wrong, close to that. So now remember how people can basically how effective the review will be, right? It will be a nightmare. It was a nightmare for the reviewer, right? So
You're right.
yeah, so that's the
I
first
can
thing.
imagine your situation over
Yeah,
there.
yeah. So that's the first mistake that basically I made. So now I basically tell to everyone that you basically what I could have done is that whenever I add a single component or single feature, let's say that I build a component for basically products, I will raise a PR for that, right? I basically build a feature for payment methods, right? And then for the payment, so every feature in that whole product spec should have been an individual PR, right? So that the person who is reviewing it would be can review it properly. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I have noticed is that whenever I think when I used to do raise the PRs, basically I was not the person who was basically very much kind of person who used to write a good documentation around the functions, right, or the proper validations around the validation around the basically a function parameters, right? So basically this is one thing that a lot of people make the mistakes. I do it, like I notice it quite often, especially the person who's basically just getting a started up. So whenever you're writing a function, make sure that you are writing a proper JS doc, right? And in that JS doc you are explaining the every parameters, right? And also the return type of it, that basically what is the return, that the type of data that this function is returning, right? So that's the another thing. Another thing is that you should always validate your parameters of the function. That let's say that you build a add function, coming back to the previous example, that takes 2 number. What happens if someone calls that function with a single number, right? In that case, your function will return an NaN, right? So basically adding proper default values or writing a function in a way that it should handle those edge cases, that if someone pass three parameters, it should add 3 numbers. If someone pass only 1 parameters, then at least it do not return a basically non-expected thing. So that's another thing. One more very common mistake that people make is that improper indentation, and I have noticed it quite often, right? So just try to follow a proper indentation in your code. You generally don't give a much value to it, but trust me on that. Basically over the period of time, if you write very improper code, it will be a nightmare for you itself to read the code and understand it, right? So following a proper indentation is really important, and a lot of people do not give enough focus on that. So having a linting in your code can solve that problem. So that's another thing. Another thing that I have noticed is that people do not write much of the test cases, right? So be it a unit test cases or integration test cases in the PR. So what happens is that every PR, generally in companies, it is mandatory to have a test cases along with your PR. But if let's say that in your company it is not mandatory, I would say that still do it, so that the test cases give you enough confidence as a developer that whatever code that you have written is actually behaving in the way that you think, right? So that's another thing. Not only that, I also believe that when you write a unit test cases, it basically, because unit test case is basically help you to write better code, right? Now how that happens, that's another topic of discussion, but trust me on that, if you start writing a unit test case and you see that there are a function which has a multiple if else and multiple nested logics or condition written, right, you will start realizing that you cannot write a unit test case for that, right? Or the unit test case is getting failed, so you have to refactor your code. So that's another advice that I would give. Another thing that I basically really follow, and that I have learned from my seniors, is when you are writing a function, make sure that you are writing proper variable name. Make sure you are giving basically the functions names are basically proper. It should not be like you are not writing some improper variables names or functions names. That's another thing. Do not write duplicate code, right? So make sure that if you are writing a duplicate code, then you are writing your code incorrectly, right? That's the one thing that you can instantly realize. And I think writing a unit test case will find it out that okay, there are multiple duplicate code within your logic. You need to do one thing. Whenever you get into those scenarios, it's a time for putting that code in a function and using that function. So that's another thing. One more thing that I would say, that use functions as much as you can, right? Functions not only allow you to reuse your code, but function always also allow you to think, increase your thinking skills, and basically help you to write unit test cases or integration test cases, right? Because you can always mock them. So yeah, these are the very pretty generic basics. I can go on for half an hour more, but the basic things that I have learned from my personal experience, and which also a lot of beginners make mistakes that people make.
Right. One of the thing that what I have learned, like which I would like to add, like what my seniors told me, whenever you're writing any complicated code, I mean complicated logic, then just put a comment over there so that someone next who is coming after you can read that. My manager always says, "Ki, write comment, write comment. Once you leave, no one will be able to understand this complicated logic." So
Yeah.
yeah, that is one thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. So guys, anyone else has any questions? Yeah. Don't repeat yourself. Yeah, right. So anyone guys, like, would you like to ask like anything, any query?
Yeah, I got one more query.
Yeah. But please.
So, we have raised a PR and we got like multiple comments, right? And before that, we have obviously we have assured one ETA, right? So, how to obviously it will take some amount of time to address all those comments and get things done, right? So obviously it will affect on that ETA, right? So uh, how can we set that ETA in that and it won't how can we adjust that ETA the next ETA or kind of thing? You got my question, right?
Right. The deadline. How can you
Exactly.
keep up with the deadline?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, that's a good question. That a good question, and also different varies from company to company. But I think so when you are basically saying so generally what happens is that again it can vary from company to company, but in my company or what in my whole professional career, generally whenever there is some feature that is given to you, people will ask you that give me a timeline you can implement this, right? That give me the estimated effort that within this that you're gonna build this, right? So what you need to do is that you know yourself best. I would say that do not give a optimistic deadline, right? Optimistic means that your best scenario you will basically implement this feature by in 2 days, right? I would say that when you are initially take a buffer of a day, right, and then give it a basically 3 day, right? Say that I will implement this thing. You can also say that I think in best scenarios I can implement it in 2 days, but considering that I'm not pretty familiar with lot of code workflows, it will take one extra days, right? And when you are saying into 3 days, you should also add the timelines of testing, the PR reviews, PR reviews time. What happens is that most of the people, especially in the beginning, do not cater in the time it will take for you to review and also to basically fix those comments, right? And also the testing time. So add when you are giving those estimates, you should include development, testing, PR reviews, and basically subsequent PR comments. The time it will take to basically resolve those comments. So add all of this and then give the timeline, and that timeline should not be optimistic. It should always either be idle or you can take a day of buffer. So if you are following this standard, following this practice, you will never get into scenarios where you are in a you are in a very stressful situation of shipping it out, shipping this feature out, but your reviews have not been completed yet.
Right.
Perfect.
Yeah. So you have to take that buffer time with you. So when you are starting off, at least then. And with time you'll get hold of it. Yeah. But for the beginning, you have to consider that buffer time. So yeah. So anyone else, guys, do you want to ask anything?
So Kotesh, one thing that I would like to add to your question. So basically, it's been more than a year that I am working now. But once what happened was I was just asked to implement. I just had to add an image in the options. Okay, select drop down. Okay. So what do you think? If you are asked to put that, what will you think? That you can do it in 2 hours or maybe 1 hour or something?
Exactly.
Right. But it was in Angular. Okay. And it was not latest one of it. It was Angular JS. The oldest version of it. Okay. So I thought that yeah, it will take me 1 or 2 hours or kya. So
Okay.
I said that yeah, I'll take it, but still, because of my past experience, I knew that I had to take a buffer time, so I had to take a day. That's it. So more than a day, what will you take for an option? But then when you start implementing it, like, oh my god, I realized that you cannot put images in does not allow us to add an image. So even if you try to put it in any way, like be it JS or uh, image tag or anyway, it was not just happening. It only takes text. So I was like, I got mad with the documentations. Like everywhere, I was searching for how to put it inside Angular JS, an image inside options, but I could not find anything. I found one thing like ng select box, something like that, that goes with Angular JS. So that was the entire code. I had to link it with the CDNs and everything, etc., etc. Then I implemented the whole JS part. It was already predefined, pre-written library. Okay, so even then, it took me 2 days, and even then, it was not working. Okay, you can imagine. Sometimes it's not possible to give like a correct ETA, because even if you think, unless you just start doing it, you will never know where it's gonna take you. Okay, so there can be situations where you think that okay, it can take me a day or two, but sometimes it's more than that. So what I would like, what I learned from this was, कि we should not go by like what the feature is, but we should first, as soon as we get the PRD or the feature to implement, we should first see like, is this possible or not? Like, how should we implement this, and like before giving the ETA, so that we can get the resources first, and usi time, like then and there, we'll get to know that okay, this cannot. It might take 2 days or so, right? So yeah, so ETA is something too tricky sometimes. So before giving a proper timeline or estimated timeline, just go and look at the feature. Even the easiest ones might be scary. Okay.
You just literally freaked me out. Okay.
No. Actually,
No.
Whenever you are stuck somewhere and you have given the ETA, the best thing is talk to your manager. Tell them that you are stuck over there, and he will understand. He'll help you out. That's why we have managers, right? That's why we have tech leads. So when you are stuck, something like that. So nothing to worry about. It just happens.
Yeah,
Everyone.
and this is not to freak you out, but this is like we are preparing you.
Exactly. I was like, I was just kidding, but that makes complete sense. Like, we shouldn't be like, I mean, like, we should not, like, we should basically like think about that thing. Like, we should go through the requirement and we should start it off, right? Then anyway, we'll get that how long it will take exactly.
I
Thanks
think
for sharing your experience.
yeah, I think the two mistake that I can notice out with that is, first is that when you are giving basically you should not give estimates just like we got on a call with the manager and manager say that okay, this is a feature that is there, can you, how much time it will take. That doesn't happen. Like if it is happening in company, generally it doesn't happen like that. Basically they will give you the feature, then take your time, go through the implementation part of it. The first thing that in your mind you should be clear with the implementation, right? So generally what happens is that write the implementation doc, right? Or at least you should be having 100% clarity about the implementation. Once you written the implementation doc for it, right, or if you have a clarity of 100% of implementation, then you can basically you have to give the ETA, because you can never give the ETA without writing the implementation doc or having 100% clarity of the implementation. So you will always be wrong, right? So that's the first part, is that whenever you are given basically that give the ETA, write implementation doc. If the implementation doc is not something that is followed in your company, have 100% clarity in your brain about implementation. When you go and write the implementation doc, you will go through the code, you will realize that you are not familiar with these other things. You can tell to your manager that, man, this is the code that or workflow I'm not familiar with, so I need some extra time for that familiarity. Or maybe you can give this task to someone else who has that familiarity of the code. So that's the first part of it. I think and the second part is that let's say that you have given 2 days, and then you after everything you have given it, right, and then you are struggling. After 1 day you realize that you are not going to meet it in 2 days, right? So I personally say that whenever you are stuck due to some problem, right? Basically, mess your head around for a half an hour. But more than that, if you're not still finding the solution, reach out to your senior asking for the help, right? Because you are not the only one in the team. Of course, there will be people who can help you out. Let's say that there is no one who can help you out, then that's a different thing, right? Then the different story. Then of course, there you can take infinite number of time to implement it, because obviously there is no one who can tell that this can be done in one day. But if there is a team, and then you reach out to the person, say that I need your help to get this done, right? Can you basically, this is the problem I'm stuck with, can you help me out, can you unblock me, get it, reach out to this, and then get it unblocked. But if that person is also not able to help you and you are still blocked, reach out to the manager saying that I think this task is not this is a pretty complex task, and I'm stuck with this, I'm blocked, and like the teammate is not able to help me, right? So of course, either the manager will try to help it out, or arrange the resources who can help you out, redirect to that person, or then of course in that scenario they will have a clear expectation that we need to have a increase the deadline. So like shifting the timeline is not a problem. The only problem is that you should convey that information as soon as you can, or you should not waste time sitting it around and then you'll notify at the last end, because then manager will also not be able to help it out.
Exactly.
So communication is the key. You have
Exactly.
to communicate.
Yeah.
Nice.
Okay, guys. Any more questions? Okay, so I guess like we had a pretty insightful session with Anshu. So yeah, thank you so much for taking your time out and helping us with these things. And we hope we can talk to you often. Like we can keep these sessions often so that we can like get a hang of it. How does it work in different companies? Yeah. So at last, like, would you like what message would you like to give to your audience? I mean, us.
I mean, the message I want to give to everyone is that basically you need to be aware of there is something called code quality. There is something called code quality. Of course, when you are doing the development all alone, it doesn't matters. But when you ultimately you go and apply in company, they will care for the code quality. Either you are sitting in a DSA round, you are writing some DSA, solving some DSA questions. There also code quality matters, or you are doing some assignments. There is enough emphasis is given on the code review and enough marks for that. So you should basically look out for what a code quality is. You should be aware of that. Now how you can do it, that's another topic of discussion, and maybe we can talk about that. For people who are working in startup or working for professional, I would say that basically if there is if do not get freaked out by very tedious or rigorous code review process. Even if you are getting good number of comments, that's fine. It basically tells you that the person who is doing the review is the good one, right? The reviewer is good. The problem is not at your end. You need to thanks to your reviewer, and you can basically you can basically see that okay, how can you reduce those number of comments, right? And how can you get rid of the mistakes that you are making, right? So you should be thankful to the reviewer if there is a, or the company if there is a good review that is happening, because obviously eventually with time you will grow tremendously, right? And code review, as I mentioned in the starting, is one of the fastest way to grow as a developer. So if that is happening, you are really lucky, and you are all set. Take it in a positive way, try to not repeat the same mistake again and again, and that will help you to grow. Now if you're in a company where the code review is not happening, I would say that try to try to get your code quality checked, or contribute to the open source. If it is not getting if you're not contributing to open source, basically look out for people who can help you out, right? Look for the platform which can help you out in the code quality by the code review process. There is no other thing. You can't increase your code quality, or you as Kritika just mentioned, you cannot know your code is bad until unless someone comes and point out the mistake that you have made. Then you will realize it, right? But again, there are some of the common things that I just mentioned. You can basically follow that in the very basic. You can make the habit of it, and like code a good person. Basically, once you get some experience, those practices basically get embedded into our styles, right? And that's why we improve as a developer, right? And
Right.
trust me on that, when you write a good code, it's become very easy to write test cases for that, unit test cases for that, and it also basically become very your code become less prone to bugs, right? So with time, you can take the number of bugs that your code is introducing as a parameter, and the number of PR comments that you are getting as a parameter to growth or a parameter of learning, right? So that's a good metrics to track as a developer. You can basically use to basically get a sense of growth.
Yeah, so adding here, I just started, like when I started my first day, I think around first week, my manager gave me 10 pointers. Ki whenever you raise a PR, you should see for this, look for this 10 pointers, and that helped me a lot. So now I have a habit. So whenever I raise a PR, I generally look for those 10 pointers. If I have completed those, if I have ticked those. So for the reviewer also, someone who was reviewing my code, he knows like he had trust on me. At least she would have followed those 10 things, those 5 to 6 things, whatever are the pointers. So likewise, when you start something, so just make a pointer like indentation. Anshu said like that. So you have to make sure your indentation is good. You have to do sanity testing around it. So these are the few points that you have to firstly write in a doc, and for the first 1 or 2 months, like you'll have to see the doc, and then you have to again, before raising the PR, you have to check those things. But after some time, you'll just get habituated, so you don't have to check those docs again and again. But yeah, so this is the one thing like I just
Yeah,
wanted to mention very
that's
well.
correct. Actually, you can. I call them as a checklist, and
Correct.
you can follow that checklist every time you commit something and you use a git post. Right before git post, just make sure that you have followed that checklist, and then you're doing a git post. And by doing so, I think in the starting it will take that thing, but eventually you will get a hang of it, and it will be part of your coding style.
Yeah, that was all about code reviews, and I guess now everyone is comfortable about around the world what code review is and how important it is as a developer and as someone who is in a good company. Because the question comes out to one thing. I'm writing a code for a startup, and the same I'm writing a code for a feature in a startup, and the same feature someone is implementing in Google,
Correct.
right? So my code and their code will be different.
Correct.
So how it will be different? Whatever test cases or whatever edge cases they might have written and what they have considered, it might be possible that I have not considered those, and my writing style is pretty different from people who are working in very good fan man companies.
Correct.
Right, so we have to make sure I know it will not happen in a day or in a year, maybe like in 6 months or something. But I guess after a year, if every time I write code, if I think on in back of my mind, if the same feature is implemented by someone who is working in a very good company, what he would have thought? How would how would he have gone through the edge cases? How would he have handled? So that is one thing that worked for me. So yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
So guys, yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and it was a really good session. And yeah, thank you, Anshu. Like, keep coming, keep enlightening us with your thought process. Yeah. So thank you, guys.